All right, let's go ahead and get started. The wonderful world of grasses. So as I was thinking about this topic and topics for native plant school, I kept coming back to how many different uses and how I'm using more and more native grasses in a lot of the designs that I do, both here at the Arboretum and for businesses and individual homeowners. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the main reason is we are in a prairie ecosystem. What was before pre-settlement, this was all prairie, and these plants, these prairie plants, particularly grasses, grew effortlessly here. And oftentimes we're trying to mimic or trying to manipulate the landscape in such a way that we try to grow plants that just are not able to thrive here. The extremes that we have, the hot and the cold, the wet and the dry, and the winds that we have really wreak havoc on a lot of these plants. And so native grasses seem to stand up to the rigors of, especially this climate here in South Central Kansas, better than a lot of other plants that might be available on the market. So, and just really love using native grasses in the landscape. They kind of evoke an atmosphere, create a sense of place, embrace a sense of place around the many natural areas that we have here. They often unify and blend the landscape, and they're great as companion plants for a lot of other wildflowers and even some shrubs. But they also add different textures and colors to the garden that change with the season, whether it's in the springtime as they're emerging, whether it's during the summer months as they're elongating and extending in the landscape. There's always something happening, changing, similar to what you would see out in the prairie. As far as grasses that work well as a lawn alternative, buffalo grass is certainly one of those. We have that in the center portion here, at center areas of the Arboretum here, and it works well as a drought tolerant, drought resistant alternative to fescue and Kentucky bluegrass. It's a warm season grass that thrives in 6 hours of direct sunlight. But this is kind of the iconic landscape. What we would like to do is take a slice of this landscape and incorporate it oftentimes into our own landscape. And whether it's dry, whether you have a dry landscape, whether it's wet, there is a plant, a palette, a group of grasses, group of wildflowers that works well for you in your landscape. And you could take a slice of this, whether it's the low areas there that stay consistently moist, or the upland areas. There's a different set of plants at each one of those locations. I love this slide because it really explains or helps define why these plants are so resilient. You can see the root systems of those plants. Typically, we only see about a third of the plant. The rest of the plant is the root system that these plants develop. And each year, such as big plants like big blue stem, about a third of those root systems start die back or decay. And that does a number of things. It helps as those root systems decompose, it adds organic matter to the soil, but it also provides aeration, areas where water can infiltrate, get deeper into the soil. But the main reason is that it stabilizes the soil and builds organic matter in the soil. And that's why you see where there was once tall grass prairie, 12, 15 feet of topsoil, and that is a result of the decomposition, the decaying process of a lot of these native grasses throughout the years. The other important characteristic, if you see the soil line there, and this is why burning is so important and doesn't damage these plants, the growing points are below the surface. So as you as you mow these plants off, as you burn them off, as in was often the case in prairie fires, they would come back and wouldn't be damaged at all by that burning process, because the growing points are just below the soil surface, so they weren't damaged by the heat. But those root systems, are 10, 15 feet deep, and that's what makes them really resilient and tough, and can stand up to the rigors of the Kansas climate. I came across this slide, and it really does a good job explaining what the difference between sedges, rushes, and grasses. Sedges have edges, the triangular shape there. The rushes and have more rounded, have a kind of a spongy pith center, but grasses are hollow and they have nodes throughout along the stem of the plant. So a grass is any of a large family of monocots, mostly herbaceous plants with jointed stems, slender sheathed leaves, and flowers borne in spikelets or bracts. Typically in the grasses that we're going to talk about, mostly are warm season grasses, and you see these flowers, you see these seed heads, these inflorescence in the fall. But all of them have nodes. They slowly spread, either by rhizome stolen or the clump that gets bigger over time, but have these sheathed or collared leaves that can be varied colors, different colors of leaves, depending on the variety of the plant. Grass characteristics: is it a warm season grass? Is it a cool season grass? Typically cool season grasses, such as June grass, which is one of the earliest blooming of our native grasses. Those bloom in June, compared to some of the warm season grasses like big blue stem, little blue stem, switchgrass, Indian grass. Those all mature in late September into October, produce their seed heads. 60 degrees is a really important number when you're talking about especially warm season grasses. Many of these grasses will not germinate unless the soil temperature is at least 60 degrees. So when you think about seeding your prairie, when you think about planting these plants, in order for them to begin to root, the soil temperature needs to be above 60 degrees in order for them to really start taking off and growing. The other important component when you think about grasses is whether they're short, medium, or tall. And that just helps with placement of these grasses within the landscape. So some uses of grasses: certainly as a lawn turf, buffalo grass is a great alternative there. Home construction, straw, paper brooms, twine, fishing rods, bamboo, decorative flooring, biofuel. Switchgrass is being explored as a potential biofuel. Furniture, water pipes, hats, and other clothing, baskets. But the main topic for today is using these native grasses in the landscape. So advantages of ornamental grasses: certainly their versatility, work great as a backdrop or screen, especially taller ones. You can mix them with other perennials. I mentioned that they're great as companion plants and as ground cover plants. They have varied appearance depending, especially on the season. What they look like in the spring is they change, and that adds kind of an ever changing look and feel to a garden setting. The fall colors, seed heads, variegation, texture, and contrast, all those are important characteristics, especially as those grasses mature, and we think about what they look like going into the winter months. They look great during the winter months and add kind of add some continuity to the landscape going into the winter months. Ease of maintenance, deep roots, we talked about that. Fill spaces, heat and drought tolerant, pest and disease free. don't require a lot of chemicals, and then environmental benefits. Certainly they conserve water, don't need to use any fertilizers or chemicals. They help with erosion control, and obviously they create habitat, whether that's through mammals, birds, butterflies, even some larger ones like this little baby fawn hiding in the grass. So ways to use ornamental grasses, and we'll talk more about each one of these here in just a little bit, but certainly they add year-round color and texture to the garden. You can use taller grasses for privacy, shorter grasses as a ground cover, can plant grasses in mass to add drama, and then soften paths with hardscape. We talked about it earlier, but it's really important to think about these grasses, not only what they look like in the fall, but as they are maturing and emerging in the spring as well. Is there ways that you can highlight other aspects of wildflowers that they're intermingled with? But certainly they look different in the spring, especially after you cut them back or burned them, and then those plants mature, ultimately producing seed heads later in the season. But it's really important to think about these, of adding year-round beauty and what they look like at different times of the year. Use taller grasses as privacy and screen. Here on the right is northwind switchgrass, gets about 5 feet tall. One of the taller ones that we've used as a pampas grass alternative is Dallas Blues. It's 6 to 7 feet tall, has more of a light blue foliage. Or totem pole or Apache rose are two other varieties, but you can certainly use these, and they're pretty quick growing. Even when you cut them back in the spring, they're pretty quick growing, especially as the temperatures warm up in May and June. You can use shorter grasses such as prairie dropseed, blue grama, pink muley grass as ground cover, filler plants, and we'll talk more about the importance of these shorter grasses in the matrix planting here in a little bit, but certainly work great as ground cover, and they look good at various times of the year, especially as they produce seed heads later in the season. You can plant in mass. There's a couple reasons, and the beauty of that is, one of the beauties of planting in mass, grasses in mass, is that it makes it easy to maintain. You know that you can send a volunteer. You can, in your own garden, you say, only thing that's supposed to be here are these grasses, everything else goes. But they look great grouped together. The picture on the left there is really striking. It creates a nice aesthetic. And then the picture on the right here with the taller grasses, a mass of switchgrass here as a backdrop, but there's several layers or rows of grasses there that look really good, highlighting and setting off those other perennials in front. Soften pathways and hardscapes with grasses. Two of the best that I choose from are prairie dropseed, and then on the upper right-hand corner there is blonde ambition, blue grama. That's a nice plant that softens pathways. Probably my favorite of the shorter grasses is the prairie dropseed. Native grasses are great, especially backlit, and the medium and taller grasses, if you have the opportunity, if you have the space in your landscape, they really look great later in the season. If you can have the sun not only lit from the front, but also lit from the back, and you can see and highlight some of those grasses. But we'll go through a lot of the native grasses that I choose from for and include in some of my landscape designs. Certainly big blue stem, turkey foot grass. There's lots of varieties to choose from Pawnee to Red October to Rain Dance. A new one is Carl's Cousin, which is a very upright, stiffly upright, new variety of big blue stem selection that has good red fall color. Obviously, Red October is a nice one because it has blood red fall color, consistent blood red fall color, but any of those native, any of those selections are will have good consistent red, orange, and yellow fall color. It gets 4 to 5 feet, 5 to 6 feet tall, but you can see how it gets its name, turkey foot grass. Indian steel or Indian grass, a variety called Indian steel, or here's a new one called golden sunset, or just a straight species, kind of a vase-shaped plant, 4 to 5 feet tall, has nice, interesting plumes, again in September or October, which are really, really striking and contrast the kind of the changing foliage from yellow to green as this transitions into the fall. Switchgrass, there's lots of variety here, from Cheyenne Sky, which only gets about 3 foot tall, has reddish leaves, reddish cast to the leaves, to Northwind, which is stiffly upright, gets 4 to 5 feet tall. Dallas Blues is a taller one, like I said, that gets 6 to 7 feet tall. But there's lots of great selection of switchgrass that really help. You can utilize these in a lot of different ways within the landscape. If you repeat these in regular succession, regular intervals, it becomes kind of a focal point in the landscape, kind of leading your eye through the landscape. Or if you incorporate these in a more regular, random pattern, kind of a relaxing rhythm within the garden. But it's really there is a native, there is a switchgrass for just about any landscape situation. And here again, here's switchgrass kind of backlit in a prairie situation. Little blue stem on the right, bottom right, is Twilight Zone. That's probably one of my favorites of the little blue stem varieties. Has a purplish cast to the leaf. Ultimately, they all have reddish orange tinge to the foliage later in the season. The Blue Heaven there on the left is a little bit taller, gets 4 or 5 feet tall. If you have really organic soil, rich soil, you may want to choose a shorter form like Munchkin or Carousel or Jazz. Those are forms that won't have a tendency to flop. Taller forms of little blue stem, such as Blue Heaven, in really rich organic soil, will have a tendency to flop. So if you have them next to a sidewalk or next to a walkway, they'll kind of flop into that walkway. So use shorter forms if you have really rich organic soil. Blue Grama, Blonde Ambition, there's also just the shorter, this gets 18 to 24 inches tall. The true, just Blue Grama, pasture type Blue Grama, it stays shorter, maybe only 12 inches tall, and can work well mixed with buffalo grass in the landscape. Prairie dropseed, it's probably a plant that I use most in my landscape designs. I love the fine foliage. I love the airy seed heads. The seed heads aren't so dense that you can't see other plants blooming further into the design. They're also very fragrant. It's mildly shade tolerant, so it's really an adaptive plant. That at one time this was the #1 selling native grass in the United States. So it really deserves a place, especially since it stays relatively short and well-mannered. Pink muhly grass, we planted these several years ago here at the Arboretum, and last year they really put on a show, whether it's the Muhlenbergii capillaris or the Undaunted variety. I love these pinkish purple seed heads, the fine foliage. It does need a well-drained soil, but we've had really good success with these, and it's a showstopper when they're in full bloom in the fall. Mexican feather reedgrass, many people have tried to grow this, and we've had relatively good success here growing it. The key to growing Mexican feather grass isn't necessarily the cold hardiness, it's the winter moisture. If you can keep these plants, if you can grow these plants in a well-drained soil, keep the crowns of the plants drier through the winter months, you'll be more successful. But very striking plant, also called ponytail grass, but it's a very fine textured grass that works well if you have good drainage. Prairie cordgrass. This is more utilitarian grasses. We'll kind of transition into some of the utilitarian grasses that have their place, maybe not so much in a formal garden like some of the ones we just talked about, but have their place. Prairie cordgrass is, you see it growing along pond edges and prairie seeps and areas that stay consistently moist, and it will slowly spread and fill in an area, but it's great for bank stabilization. Gets 4 to 5 feet tall, but it has its place, but not so much in a formal garden. Eastern gama grass, I love the seed heads of these, which birds and other wildlife eat. Has wide leaves, like prairie cordgrass, needs a more consistent moisture. It's not as adaptive to drier soils as some of the other warm season grasses like big blue, swim, and switchgrass, but it does have its place. We have some here just south of the visitor center, and when those seed heads develop, it's really striking. Side oats grama likes drier conditions. It's 2 to 3 feet tall. As the name implies, all of the seeds are held on one side of the stem, as you can see there on the left. So it does have its place in the landscape. Again, maybe not so much a plant that you want to include in a formal garden, but if you're doing a prairie reconstruction, this would be one of the plants that you want to include in your seed mix. Prairie June grass, as the name implies, the seed has developed in June. This is a cool season grass. It's maybe 12 to 18 inches tall. This is Brad Guru, one of Brad Guru's favorite grasses, because those seed heads are so attractive and so unexpected so early in the season. But Prairie June grass is a nice grass that you can include in a prairie reconstruction, or in one of your formal garden beds. A mass of these can be really attractive. This would be one of the plants that you want to include in kind of as the ground cover layer of a matrix planting, which we'll talk about here in a little bit as well. Buffalo grass, as I mentioned earlier, is a nice lawn alternative. Oftentimes you'll see this seeded with planted from seed with lots of great varieties, whether it's Tatanka or Cody. There's several different new varieties that are out that are a little more adapted to our climate, but a nice lawn alternative to fescue. Needs 6 hours of direct sunlight. Will not be happy if it in any kind of shaded situation, but it will slowly spread and fill in. Some of the newer varieties green up earlier in the spring, stay green longer in the fall, and then have shorter node length, which means that it spreads quickly and fills in. I've seeded this in August, and by the middle of September had complete coverage from seed. So it can be a nice alternative to areas that you don't want to irrigate, that don't have irrigation, and get full sun. Western wheatgrass, again, a plant that doesn't necessarily fit into a formal garden, but has its place. This is one that they're studying for food value. Sand lovegrass, as the name implies, needs more of a quick draining sandy soil. Purple lovegrass is another form that has purplish seed heads. Scribner's panicum, again, not a plant that, not a grass that is utilized a lot, but it does have its place, especially if you're doing a prairie reconstruction. And then porcupine grass, as the name implies, the seed is pointed and very much like the quill of a porcupine. So there's literally a grass for every landscape situation, whether it's wet or dry, whether it's an area that's high or low. There's a grass for just about every prairie, every situation that homeowners or businesses may encounter. So when I incorporate native grasses, I really embrace this idea of Pete Udolph that use 70% structure plants, and grasses are part of those structure plants. Other structure plants are repeat bloomers or long season perennials like asters. And the rest of those are offer pops of color at various times of the year. It could be coneflowers, could be eleatris, could be black-eyed Susan. But the majority of the plants that you include in your landscape design are these structure plants and grasses. The variety of grasses, whether it's switchgrass, little blue stem, prairie dropseed, or combination of other grasses like big blue stem, offer those structure plants, and the rest of those are filler plants. We've also started doing more matrix planting, and that's where the structure layer, which we talked about as grasses, could be a shrub, could be a taller perennial here like Joe Pieweed there on the top. Combine that with the seasonal theme layer, could be coneflower, liatris, black-eyed Susan, goldenrod, gives you color at different times of the year, and then the ground cover layer. That could be prairie dropseed, could be June grass, could be blue grama, could be side oats. But you combine those three layers together so that they are planted so intensely, so tightly that it keeps shades out the ground, and the plants don't, other weeds don't grow. And so you have kind of this living mulch. There's no mulch out in the prairie, and so you're kind of mimicking what is happening out in the prairie by planting, by putting plants in there so densely that it crowds out a lot of the weeds. And this is something that we're doing more and more all the time. This is just a picture of what that matrix planting would look like. The other thing with regards to matrix planting is that each of these, the structural layer, the seasonal theme layer, the ground cover layer, grows, the roots grow in different zones. So the ground cover layer, most of the root systems are in the top 12 to 18 inches. The seasonal theme layer, most of those roots are in the top 2 to 4 feet, whereas the structural layer, those roots are a lot deeper. And so they're not in competition, so these plants are able to grow in community, grow harmoniously together, because they're not in competition with one another. And oftentimes it's not the case with some of the designs that we do. There is a lot of competition amongst plants. So this matrix planting really is a good example of how to group plants together so that they grow in community or harmoniously together. This is a planting. In the front there is October Skies Aster, which will bloom later in the season, with some switchgrass behind, a mixture of prairie dropseed and little blue stem with the coneflowers growing there. And that's kind of the seasonal theme layer for late spring, early summer for this particular planting. Later on the season, there's liatris that are blooming in here. There's black-eyed Susans that are blooming in here as the grasses continue to mature and fill up the space. This is the second year of a matrix planting. Here we have butterfly milkweed that would be considered a seasonal theme layer plant, with some other grasses beginning to take on and extend into the summer as the summer progresses. Again, think about what these plants look like, not only in the spring, summer, but as they mature in the fall. Here's switchgrass with some penstemon there in the front, mixed with some crepe myrtles and roses there in the background. Another important aspect to consider when you're thinking about your landscape design is where you're going to be looking at these plants from. We talked about if you have the space, allowing the sunshine to come through on the backside of the grasses. That really highlights the forms and textures in the seed heads. Are you going to be looking at this from your front porch? Is this a foundation planting? Are you going to be looking at this from the road? This particular garden, the taller plants are in the center with the shorter plants radiating out from the side. So, and there's three distinct layers. There's the shorter plants, we talked about 4 to 24 inches. And then there's the medium plants of 2 to 4 feet, and then the taller plants there in the middle of Indian grass. The other thing to think about is, and Pete Udolph does this really, really well, is to accept the beauty of decay. These grasses will, as the fall colors fade, and as we move into the winter months, there is a beauty to dried up grasses, to tan grasses, different forms, different textures of those grasses. And that's why we encourage people to leave the grasses up as long as they possibly can in the landscape. We've just started here at the Arboretum cutting our grasses and perennials back. We'll do that over the next several weeks here, but in preparation for spring. But this is what ultimately those grasses will look like after they're cut off. The other thing that they're not doing here is, and what we've gone to doing, is we leave a lot of our clippings, especially grasses, in the landscape. There's lots of insects that overwinter in those stems, and we used to haul all of that away. Now we keep all of those stems and use that as mulch or ground cover, and leave it in as much as we possibly can in the landscape. Sometimes you have to remove some of it, but we certainly don't remove all of it. We start at the top with a hedge trimmer and just kind of go back and break it down into pieces that are 2 or 3 inches, and let the natural decomposition process take place. But ultimately, those plants will begin to emerge after you cut them back. Those grasses will emerge and start to grow as the soil temperatures warm up. Again, the important temperature is 60 degrees. Once the soil temperatures get above 60 degrees and we have lots of sunshine, they're really, really going to jump out. Those warm season grasses are really, really going to jump out of the ground. Well, at this time, we'll move to question and answer time, and see what questions you have about native grasses. Thanks.